for today. So let me introduce you to our special guest. Barbara Sher Tinsley is a retired teacher, a world traveler, a poet, an artist. What else shall I add to that today?
Gardener.
Okay, all right. Fabulous, fabulous friend. And I'm so happy to welcome her here today. I'm going to let you tell them more about you. Thank you. Okay. Come on in, folks. There's lots of cheers.
Well, I have had a long career. We won't go into why or how long. But my forte for many years was scholarship. And I studied English history, Tudor history, and then got a degree from Stanford, a doctorate in Reformationsgeschichte, the history of the Protestant Reformation. And I wrote several books on it, and I wrote a book on antiquity, and I ran back and forth across the nation to various conventions, and then I changed. All of a sudden, I didn't want to do that anymore. I can't say I tired of teaching, but teaching tired of me. I haven't taught now for 2.5 years, and I have never been happier. I have taken up watercolor painting. I brought some, quite a few actually, too many. In May, I started painting, and I started writing after a lapse of 52 years, poetry again, because as a child and until I met my husband, who used to look like that, a young man in a white shirt, looking down, was 26 and I was 19, and that's how he looked when I met him. And so, you know, I started teaching high school, teaching in colleges, raising children, going to college, having my oldest daughter who's wearing purple in the back row, interrupting my college career, going back to Stanford and so on. So I've had a motley career, but I stopped writing poetry for 52 years. I have a couple that I wrote as a very young girl in this collection. I may get to read them to you. So now what do? I garden intensely. I write poetry. I'm just about ready to send off my first novel to iUniverse, which is, let's face it, a vanity press. But until Knopf knocks on my door, that's what it will be. You can buy it on Amazon. You can read it on your iPod or iPad or wherever you read things. Kindle, Nook. I know the names, I don't use them. But I would just rather share poetry with you today, and I have to say that I put these up for 2 reasons. Once in a while, when I get into a topic, it may be mountains, it may be lighthouses, I'm kind of ape on lighthouses, I write a poem on lighthouses. I paint, or I write a poem on mountains. I don't necessarily do it at the same time, but around the same time. So while my poems aren't all illustrated with my pictures, some are, and I'll just leave it up to you to look around on the walls. Maybe if I'm in a good mood and have time, I'll indicate which way to look. I thought my first poem would be an antique Renaissance poem, since I spent so much of my life in the Renaissance. And it's called a triolet. It was popular in the 14th and 15th century, and Chaucer, by the way, took a lot of these old forms and put them into English equivalents. And then again, they had a rebirth in the 20th century. There are some famous Renaissance forms written up in the 20th century. But I'm going to read you a triolet because it's very simple. It repeats itself. The first 2 lines are the last 2 lines. It goes quick as a bunny. And it just makes me feel good to read a triolet. This one is called All for You Goes Well. All for you goes well, when well you for it go. And call what you find swell, all for you goes well. cast your magic spell and set your charm to glow. All for you goes well when you well for it go. Simple, isn't it? They can be very difficult to write because you're limited to just 2 rhyming words and you have to make sense. This poetry reading is called Art, Passion, Poetry. Although we're in a JCC, I did study Reformation history, and I've got to tell you that art, passion, and poetry resembles the Trinity in a literary way, not a theological way. Because the 3 are one in many respects, and 1 is 3. That is, art and poetry and passion have a common ground. I can't tell you what it is. It differs depending on the poems you're reading, but I tried to select poems that interrelate, and I think you can judge for yourself if I did. I'm going to read the first one about love, which is passion. Let's be honest. Writing poetry, painting is passion. One of my poems is so passionate it may send a few prudes running for the ladies' room, but most of them are not that passionate. This one is called Field of Love. Come, take my hand and run with me through fields of daisies, buttercups, where sip the hummingbird, the honey bee. There will you like honey be to me. There will I like butter be to you. Hearts like hands entwined, we'll on each other as do birds, bees, flowers dine. Now, if you can't see butter and honey in a field, probably you don't appreciate something like that. But to me, this is very light romance. And it reminds me of the fields I ran in as a child in upstate New York. They were full of daisies and buttercups. This poem, the next poem, is called But Can You Teach It? And I occasionally get into a very sardonic or skeptical or cynical mode. And this occurred because I take a wonderful literature course taught by Lynn Rogers every Thursday. 2 of our members are here. Paul, 3 of our members are here. 3 of our members are here. You got lost. I have a poet from our poetry class. I have a great painter on whom I have a poem very shortly. And I have an essayist and deep thinker with a beard, who is stroking it now, sitting on the couch. Well, my teacher said to me early in this quarter, take the poets, including Leslie here, who is a poet, and go into the other room and inspire them to write poetry. Teach them something about poetry. We had a ball. There were 4 or 5, sometimes 6 of us. We had a lot of fun, but I didn't teach them a thing. They taught me something about poetry. And then Leslie had a poem she was working on and read it, and I brought one of my short, recent poems and read it. But altogether, we just chatted about the joys and problems of being poets. So then I went home and I wrote, But Can You Teach It? Which means, can you teach poetry? Is poetry even teachable? Is some stranger's head and heart, sense and sensitivity even reachable? One thing of which I'm almost sure, and that's not unimpeachable, is when you feel yourself a ship whose sails are billowy, maybe that direction, pillowy. Ah, yes. Pillowy, you're setting sail for poetry, and unbeachable. Is poetry ever learnable? It's well known, much attempted was, by its authors burnable. Perhaps their would-be subject wasn't quite discernible. The poet took a turn that was not turnable, in which case he must churn up something churnable. And yet, it must even now be said, poetry is more than what will butter bread. You may not see that the last lines fit, but that's up to you. I can't feel for you or think for you. You have to think if this is reasonable or just plain idiotic. And that's the listener of poetry, the reader of poetry's prerogative. Because I read a lot of poetry that I don't like. Now, I mentioned my reading class, and I've introduced Carol. Carol, do you want to stand up? Take a bow.
Standing up's a problem.
Carol is a wonderful artist. Her paintings are so unlike mine, and they blow me away. I could never paint anything like this. But when we get into our classroom, our teacher often says, write fast, because several of us are painters. Write a poem or an essay on that painting, any painting that shows up, and we have 5 to 10 minutes usually to do it. And this is what I wrote in about 6 minutes. Blue room, orange chair, 2 women, painting by Carol Graspy. Was it the fascination of bareness in this blue room with orange chair that kept one woman staring at the corner as rectilinear as her oh so straight back? The fact that she was perched upon the chair's one arm made her intense in attention to her friend all the more arresting. And why was the friend an S-shaped curve, head down on chair, knees on ground, formal gown draped over blue carpet, so deeply sleeping? All the two had in common was their detachment from each other, or else they were the same woman in 2 different costumes at 2 different times. Only the chair knew. I have to say about this poem that it is most unusual for me because it does not rhyme. And whenever I write about Carol's paintings, I don't rhyme. I don't know why. So there is a mystery about writing poetry. I think, Leslie, you will agree. I sometimes feel as if I'm in the hands of a muse that has caught me up and will not let me go. My next poem is in Latin, Ars Poetica, the art of poetry. A poem well written bonds the heart, a vagabond with the universe, and should sustain the lonely soul, the one who cannot travel free, yet needs to dream, needs to see, longs to do what poems can, reach out freely, self-sustained, yet anchored to eternity. A poem written well's a work of healing, not of vain belief, relieving sufferers from silence, beauty's shade, affirming life. a signature to what was once unsaid, music passing through the skin, sonata, rhyme of spirit, daffodils, and time. A poem is a lighthouse on the shore, beckoning to one who'd reckoned on no more direction, safe harbor, joy. A fare thee well in well-being, an envoi, a send-off. Claire, is that the right translation? Claire is a French major from Santa Barbara. I'm only a minor, so sometimes. The next one is about love, and it's very short. And my middle name is Hope because my parents hoped for a boy and didn't get one. So I wrote a poem on hope in my own honor. Hope that is the core of love. Hope that longs to soar above the hopelessness of daily trials. Hope that overcomes the tears, now smiles. We're tempted by so many hoped-for things, that's true. But what I hoped for most and got, and still have in my heart, is you. And I was thinking of my husband who wears a beret and is sitting in the back row and looked like that at 26.
I still look like that.
And still looks like that. This is another passionate poem. It's called Continued Passion, which isn't so easy when you come to think of it. I mean, all you people have been married forever and ever. Remember, continued passion is very rare, I think. Had I the passion or the clout to turn heart, brain, inside out, and lave them in the gentle rain that flows to rivers where swim trout, I think I could unite with stars and shine like glowworms in glass jars, as when we children held aloft our own, caught in gardens and on loan from Mother Nature. Who was she anyway? Why, as we grew older, did we let our hearts grow colder, and instead of bolder unions with our brains, restrain the acts of love, thoughts of imagination in the heart, accompaniment of both to rivers and the sea? Let a cruel stepmother unnatural dictate what could and could not be, what could not, should not set us free. To say what heart and brain conjoined might yet do. Who gave her sway? Not me, not you. Then let us fill our jars again with light, and run through gardens at the fall of night, and let us be as we were at 10, or 2 times 10 and 3, and let us feel again that rush of potency and joy that made us then, each girl and boy, light-hearted, passionate, free. Who, anyway, was she? Now, I've got to say, if you didn't chase glowworms with mason fruit jars in a state that has glowworms, you might be confused. How many of you did catch glowworms? Lightning bugs, some people call them.
Fireflies?
Fireflies, good.
Witch flies?
Fireflies. In other words, that poem is about giving up our sensitivity as we age because we think we should give up some of that magic we had as a child. Who knows, I might start a trend. All the people in Saratoga and Los Gatos will start running through the night with their mason jars.
Fireflies here, you have to go to a magic place where they exist.
They do exist in a magic place. This one is called Poetry's Lover. Although my collection is about poetry, it is also perhaps more correct in some cases to use the term poetics. What makes poetry work? What are the rules and right of its being? But poetry stands in for both poems and the study of poetry, which is poetics. This is called Poetry's Lover. Nothing in me more dispels ennui than writing villanelles. That's another of those Renaissance forms. Nor removes my sadness, say, than getting off a triolet. I have no bees inside my bonnets, so leave me be just writing sonnets, and if you do, then you may fondle my most brassy, sassy, private rondel. For I am not shy, nor pristine. Ah, for you I'd write my best sestina. Now leave me to my pen and paper, ease my labor, light my taper. If I cannot cheer us both, then brand me a poetic sloth. What? Everything I've writ you loathe? Then find another to unclothe. I just didn't have any more stickers. These are copies of paintings by a famous French painter. I think his name is something like Verondel. How does she go? She's on a sofa. So if you wish to unclothe me, I guess I'd kind of look like that. Maybe I did once. For I have stripped myself quite bare, writing verse antique and fair. Then fare thee well, adieu, adieu. I'll squander not my muse on you, not me, my pen, I'll now lay down. Do take your purse, I have my crown. When dressed and veiled in poetry, I'll find a lover who's more true to me. It's kind of playful. But poems, poets, are sometimes playful. This is another antique form. Again, the problem is you have to find words that rhyme, and you're only given two essential rhymes. In this case, ong and ought. Song, taught, wrought, song. Artistic excellence, a rondel. What cannot righted be must be forever wrong. Such perfection as we seek may not be taught. The artistry that leads to it by discipline is wrought. Art's excellence, our need of it we praise in song. The casual dilettante shall not art haunt for long. His will's too shallow, too unstable, and too fraught. The time he passes wondering how, if he could or ought, soon o'ercomes him and his timorous throng. The product of an artist's hand is pure and strong. No efforts by it spared, or shared another's thought, What cannot righted be must be forever wrong. Such perfection as we seek may not be taught. Now I know that all the creative writing teachers, English teachers, art school teachers, music teachers would rise up en masse and protest. But, you know, everybody's entitled to a changing opinion. I'd be the last to say, don't take lessons in anything, because I truly believe in education, art education above all. I think it's a shame we have left it out of our schools. But as I said, I can be cynical and sardonic, and when I'm in that mood, I can say, you'll never learn. Okay, this is a long poem. It's called Watercolor Painting for Beginners. I'm a beginner. I started painting watercolor in May 6th. And I have painted quite a few paintings. Many I left at home. When I read these 1, 2, 3, and 4, they're sections of poems. Thank God they're only 4. You can see what I am thinking and painting as well as making poetry about. Because a thought, a subject seems to grab my mind and come out in all directions. I've been painting a lighthouse, red and white. Must be this one, although most of them are red and white. 4 other buildings on the same lateral rocky site beneath a lavender and blue, oh, it's this one, lavender and blue, orange, aqua white, a sky. The same multicolored strokes repeated in a purple, aqua, red, and orange sea. Some might find these mingled hues quite odd, but colors, lighthouses, rocky promontories, and little cottages are so Cape Cod. I have a cottage somewhere. I think it's on the table. Having purchased for $2, less than passage to La Suisse, Switzerland, I brought home a book of Swiss photos, exquise, and set out just my blue paints, cobalt, cerulean, phthalo, ultramarine, to paint a splendid mountain range, a stunning mountain scene. Well, you can see I have some mountains on this side of the room, so that's what I was doing. I copied what I saw, I did my best, but there were so many peaks I soon felt very pressed for lack of talent, pressed for time. I took a bold, black-laden brush right over there and slashed at every sharp incline until I had completed miles of jagged Swiss terrain. I did it for economy of time, not monetary gain. Let's go to Martha's Vineyard. All the best folk do. And there we'll search out an old mill with waterfall of blue. The mill was built of mottled stone, each once filled this field. Can I, a newly minted artist, make this paper, these tints, this ample clutch of brushes yield an ancient mill? I spent 3 days, not steadily, but readily, giving it my all, exerting every ounce of my artistic will to make this waterfall like waterfalls in each New England watercourse. And did I? For the answer to that question, I must check out your source. And so, to a small lighthouse, that's my smallest, one in blue and white. It sits above the sea and shines its light on fog against a royal blue sky. for it is night, when sailors seek out what they most need after grog, a sign that they will reach home port, and soon. Tonight, should disaster befall its lighthouse master, there's a moon, which is lucky. I mean, sometimes the moon is so bright it wakes me up, so I suppose if there's a bright moon at sea and the lighthouse doesn't work, it's a boom. I wrote this poem 2 months ago. It's a biographical poem. Hello, Elizabeth, come in. I met my husband when I was 19, he was 26, on Bascom Hill, University of Wisconsin. How many of you have ever been there? Okay, that's where we met, up in front of Bascom Hall, and it was raining cats and dogs. And it's called, this poem is called Rain, Drought, Poetry. I remember when it rained, before the drought came and lowered reservoirs of memory until the level dropped too low to recreate poetry about our past. I remember when it rained. Life was somehow caressed by gentleness, reproved by rain's ferocity. We were in Texas, Michigan, Wisconsin. Oh, I remember how it rained in Madison. I ran down Bascom Hill, soaking to my skin, and there you were, admiring how I looked so wet, just 19. Now the drought has settled into our sweet California. We scan each day the bright blue sky where sunshine turned my spigot dry against poetry, affording me a mere sporadic drip. My reservoir of metric verse has dropped below the level of its once so fluid flow. The drought has had its way with me and poetry. Not that the garden suffers, I water it each day, and in this way defy the lack of rain that keeps my spirit dry, denying a pervasive doubt that when or if the rain returns, I won't remember inundation. I may find that rain has not washed poems in again, but like the drought, has cleared them out. And life goes on. I, dependent on this California sky, beneath which I have loved and lived and written history, memoirs, novels, from a reservoir of life. Might I not wonder if, to a large degree, it has been mere weather that produced in me such creativity, such love? For plainly, all that has rained down on me, and I remember rain, came only from above. I remember rain and love. Bit long, sorry. The next poem is something that hits us all, I'm sorry to say. It's called On Being Lonely. But the general subject I've written in handwriting is art, so let's see how it turns out. I don't always remember what my poems are about. Isn't that terrible? To be lonely, a state of deprivation of one's kind, is not to be alone if working with one's mind. The state aloneness is to some abomination, Solitude creating art is true emancipation. Writing poetry, novels, memoirs, painting, practicing Chopin's sonatas, even gardening, profoundly frees the spirit. No other kinds of work comes near it. One may, like Jay, think The Great Gatsby, be lonely at a party one is hosting, be abandoned New Year's Eve in Old Times Square. The perfect milieu for those not busy toasting, for me, is creativity. So here's to artists everywhere. They say, what is the saying? If you get a bunch of lemons, make lemonade. So I make lemonade. This one is called perfection, which is what we are all seeking, I think. Say then that what we seek and what we find are never what we have in mind when first we start. Oh, my dear, say too, it's clear that what we arrive at in the end is more than any blend of happiness that was conceived before we met, before we dared believe. Tell no one in your most expansive mood the nature of our perfect good, and if you could tell, don't. For no perfection lasts when shared, except with one whose soul is bared to yours. Let this perfection swathe itself in silk, and then let's shut it off from those not of our ilk. Well, painting life, this is about life and watercolor painting, which, as I said, I knew nothing about when I started, but I did have a book. I do have a book called How to Paint in Watercolor, and it's the most boring book I ever picked up. The man is a terrible painter. He absolutely insists. Do you have a question?
I don't have a question. I have a comment.
Yes.
I can't contain my feelings any longer.
Then speak out. After 45 years of classroom teaching, I always expect when someone does that, that they are going to say, "You're a fraud."
I'm sorry, I can't say that.
Well, thank you. Save your clapping, though, for the end, if you want to clap.
That was very kind.
Well, anyway, this book on watercolor painting said you have to start with a wash, and this frightened the daylights out of me because it meant soaking my paper. And soaking paper is something that's very hard for me. I don't know why, but I think it goes against the grain. But nevertheless, we start our lives awash. No lines, no color, wet, sound, but nothing shaped except, perhaps, our genitals, heredity, and those mere pencil lines drawn faintly on the paper's bumpy surface. Surprisingly, of late, the genitals, not the bumps, changeable at will, if not later willed at all. Any details, outline, shadowing, highlights, strong lines, mist, mystery, must be added slowly, delicately traced with pencil first, then colored carefully. Depression, panes gray and blue. Isolation, burnt umber, ivory black. Jealousy, yellow ochre mixed with viridian. love, alizarin crimson splashed with violet. Use with discretion if you try it. Our personality and appearance can clash garishly with our surroundings, which will invariably not be of our making. Painting life is not living it. Limbed by circumstance, filled in by an artist of moderate skill, he cannot, even if he will, bring this picture off to please all viewers in the gallery, through which we, richly framed or just loosely rolled, go strolling past the bored eyes of the guards. This is the gallery of life. Once you pass the rotunda, you may pause for pictures, actually pose for pictures, there between the ficus and the fern. Now, this poem was inspired by a trip my friend Suprani, my husband, and I made to an art exhibit by Georgia O'Keeffe, and I have a poem very far down the line about Georgia O'Keeffe. But I remember that as we strolled through the de Young Museum in August, I had this feeling that we were as much paintings as, or pictures, images, as hers. And many people were posing for pictures in the rotunda between the ficus and the fern. And so that experience got into a poem. Okay. I don't know how many of you know the poetry of Walter Butler Yeats. Anybody ever read a poem by Walter Butler Yeats? Well, he was one of those wonderful men who loved women, and this is a program on passion in part. So I've got Passion's Fools in honor of Walter Butler Yeats. We are all passion's fools, and too many are there who too conveniently forget it. We are all fashion's tools, and so we should admit it. For every brave and honest sinner, some old cheat claims he's a beginner, who quickly denigrates his worth, surely benefits this earth. Of candid folk there is a dearth. Why have I opened up these gates? The reason I have just put down Yeats. Of course, no one can put him down. He wasn't any sort of clown to be put down. No, take him up for a full crown. A crown would, I think, have suited him. His poetry harks back to all men crowned with vim and lust, and so it's only just that at a ripe age he did vow that women still did please him then, again, again, and yet again. And if a man like Yeats admits that the old urging were not for purging, a modern poet can be expected to echo nicely, for he's respected. And if that poet's another gender, I think Yeats would at her gates be just that much more tender. This is a get 'em back. Lynn Rogers, my writing teacher, really liked this one. You've seen my little nudes. I won't hold them up again. But she liked this because she's a feminist. Nude portraiture. Is it rude to draw a nude? So many have been painted. And here's a thought. All that was wrought by some other nude's been painted. For under an artist's clothes, you must suppose there lies another one. Not nude for fun, Men have painted mostly women without clothing, not unclothed men. We female artists should respond by painting the male nude, so then the other sex could better see how when unclothed, a nude's not free to hide the flaws most all possessed, of too much flab, too little chest, of mottled skin and not well muscled, of feeling chilly, silly, hustled. I think if women drew men nude, most models would be apt to brood, as women do, when private tissue appears small, deflated, drapey. Men wouldn't be elated if their own tissue were the issue and proved just as flaccid, just as crepey. I was thinking of Nora Brombeck, is it? Who wrote, I feel so badly about my neck.
Oh, no, that's,
I fluffed the title, but
yeah,
you know.
kind of, it's not I hate my neck, that's the gist of it.
Something about it being crepey she didn't like. Bridges. I have some bridges around. Where are they? Oh, yes. This is a railroad bridge in New Hampshire. This is a bridge at daybreak looking at San Francisco. I guess it's the Golden Gate. And this is definitely the Golden Gate, but not at daybreak. And this, of course, is the Ponte Vecchio. And my husband and my young family used to live somewhere in back of it, so that we walked along it very often when we were living in Florence. Bridges, a bridge mostly. No, a bridge most simply fills a void, a space, and lets you get from place to place. You cross it, leaving parts behind that you may or may not ever find. A lover, garden, books, and such. Crossing bridges can cost much. And having done, you're out of touch. Every crossing takes its toll on what you thought would be your goal. Though you crossed it over Roman arches, framed by cypress trees or larches, or drove across a steel suspension, you'll not escape the apprehension that doth fundamentally derive from being where you hope to thrive. Transitions inevitably involve a passage you alone resolve. Oft a bridge extends an invitation to your whole life's recreation. When I write poems, sometimes I really write about what the title is. I mean, I'm, apt to write about a flower if I call it a poem about daffodils, but I'm more apt to move from the concrete image to a different place, a different image, and leave the original title behind. It's just the way I do it. Well, another poem by Yeats. I guess I'll do Goethe, the Sorrows of Werther, that Goethe. 19th century poet, romantic, but also a philosopher. And he had a color theory, which I didn't know until the other night. I often write poems on this old Horizon magazine. I was writing poems. And then I turned to the middle of it, and there was an article on Turner, wonderful Turner paintings. I mean, God, I saw a Turner exhibit in the Grand Palais in Paris once that almost reduced me to ash. But I chose the last, oh, Venice, can't even talk about Venice. Chose the last painting, which doesn't look like much for those of you in the back row. What you're seeing here is blue, purplish brown, a white void, something that should be ground but doesn't look at all like it. It's in brown and purple and green and yellow and white, and there's nothing in sight that actually catches the eye, and only Turner could get away with this. If you're Turner, you can. I'm not. But it was Goethe's color theory that got me, because romantics always get me. I try to overcome a strong tendency to romanticism, but then my logic takes over and my skepticism, and so I have a fight going on between romanticism and skepticism. So this poem is called Goethe's Color Theory, Turner's Painting. Goethe theorized that certain colors, blue, blue-greens, and purple, had a minus quality that caused a viewer to be anxious, restless, susceptible. To what exactly Goethe did not mention any circumstance or thing perceptible. But Joseph William Mallard Turner took him at his word, and in the evening of the deluge, though Goethe's theory smacked of the absurd, transformed his principles into a most anxiety-producing scene, a central void, a vortex white, inscribed and circled by a sky of blue and green, while underneath a heath of yellow, green, and purplish brown, without a tree, a stone, a cottage, road, or town, lay tumbled, jumbled, in a royal welter. O Turner, couldn't you have given us, to withstand this storm, some hint of minimal, if symbolic shelter? Painters, like poets, I believe, would do their best to draw a curtain over theories of romantics, who, like themselves, would leave us angsty, full of anxiety, and uncertain. I'm not big on uncertainty. I mean, I really like things spelled out and put in tidy little boxes where I can locate them. I have to confess that I am very fond of this artist, this poem. Poet, speak right, Barbara. Mm-hmm. It's a picture of E.E. Cummings, Thomas Estlin Cummings, and it doesn't give the date, but I suppose he was in his late 30s. And the pose with a hat seemed to my husband to be, well, what did you say? Something like playful. He's having his way with us. I know a lot of hat wearers in this audience. I can see several in front of me, yes. And hats express a man's personality in a way that I think they do not for a woman. And anyway, who wears hats anymore, women? But men do.
Paul Calgar wears hats.
Paul Calgar and you wear hats, yes, we know that. There he is with his hat backwards. This poem is Who I Might Have Been, and it mentions E.E. Cummings, but it does more than mention him. E.E. Cummings, how many of you are familiar with anything he ever wrote?
Oh, Capri.
Well, for those who aren't, he took language, turned it inside out, very often made it do tricks that no words could ever do if it weren't for a poet like E.E. Cummings. I just love the man, but he's infuriating at the same time. I mean, who could write like this? What if the much of a witch of a wind gives the truth to summer's lie, bloodies with dizzying leaves the sun, and yanks immortal stars awry? And that's not all. He has a habit of making women speak languages of the hair, of the skin, of the ears, the eyes, that they don't speak. The hair itself has hands. The ears see. The eyes hear. To read a poem by E.E. Cummings is to really battle, really battle. Okay, I just read a couple of verses of this. This is called My Love by E.E. Cummings. My love, thy hair is one kingdom, the king whereof is darkness. Thy forehead is a flight of flowers. Thy head is a quick forest filled with sleeping birds. Thy breasts are swarms of white bees upon the bough of thy body. Thy body is to me April, in whose armpits is the approach of spring. Thy thighs are white horses yoked to a chariot of kings. They are the striking of a good minstrel. Between them there is always a pleasant song. I mean, who can write like that? Only a genius. Reading enough E.E. Cummings will drive you to imitate him. Who I might have been. I am as if I lived in beams of shade, in gleams that reaching deep inside a glade, provide at once my shelter and my stage. I am a soul impressionable, filled to the brim with dreams of happiness and love. Were I an E.E. Cummings, I'd poeticize more sprightly, a Walt Whitman more deeply and more lightly, a Robert Frost more naturally and fresh. Emily Dickinson, I'd drop my thoughts quite carefully into a reticule of lacy mesh. A reticule was a kind of handbag for all you moderns, but when I was a little girl, my ancient neighbor, who had been born in the middle of the 19th century, gave me parasols and reticules and all kinds of stuff we don't use anymore. So in my mind, it's still very, very much alive. This is a very short poem I wrote when I was 16 or 17. I found a mandolin in an attic that we moved into, a flat in Milwaukee. People live in flats. I know we don't live in flats anymore, but they do in the Midwest. This is mandolin, a lobe of fitted wood, black, like a sweet peach rotting, and a face tinted to aging honey. 12 pegs on a neck bent back, uncontemporary attack on progressive jazz, mandolin, scent of half-remembered time, of song under lilac. I have to tell you that in that house there was a lot of lilac bushes in the backyard. I know it's progressing, but I'm going to give you a hard poem on E.E. Cummings and see if you can handle it. You might not be able to, you might not want to, but I like it. I'll try to indicate what it was he said by doing this, which means quote marks. To see the world as E.E. Cummings did, then what is obvious must be hid, and what undone be deftly did, or else the world would as openly be revealed as Genesis, which is to say, not ever to be revealed at all. No, to get at old E.E., you'll have to be a master of absurdity and contradiction, of Genesis with its occasional rare poetic benediction. E.E. saw a pattern, making of total nonsense the only sensible solution, the modern choice. Does anyone have eyes that smell of the sound of rain, unless they have been crying all the day from thunderous pain? His lady's eyes are all too often frailer than most dreams are frail. But whatever those orbs do, it must be true that her ears warily beheld what those frail, rain-sound smelling orbs left unheard. And since frailer than most deep dreams are frail, went unnoticed. All this wouldn't matter much if, with every least each most remembering, who cares but Edward Estlin Cummings? Such remembering would not leave much knowing to support the world's convictions, all disputed by those knowers. Every least though most forgetting one, as E.E. said before he came undone. And anyway, nobody knows where truth grows. So, to sum it all up, old E.E. was busily subverting so much that we, as reality, frail-eyed, claim to see. He never, to my unknowledge, wrote, I think, about optometry. Completely dare to be beautiful. Most women do not look their best when tired, I should add. It had to be so dutiful of him to even try to see it, what with him meeting King Christ in Harvard Yard. We do not know precisely. But what he said was that nearer him than you, he, in his view, I mean E.E.'s, not J.C.'s, was made of nothing except loneliness. And yet he did not, as I recall, offer J.C. a cup of coffee, an opportunity to sit and chat. I know, E.E. Cummings is hard. But hard things sometimes really pay off if you work hard at them. And I have had to work hard at him because it doesn't come naturally. I don't think he meant his poetry to come naturally. And I do generally. Well, have you had enough? It is 10 after, and that's really when I started to read. If you've had enough.
Do you think he cared? If you found it easy?
Do I think E.E. cared?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think some artists create not for an audience, but maybe for themselves. You know?
Yes, I do that occasionally. That's true, Sandy. That is very true. Many artists, on the other hand, are eager to put out an inclusive net to enfold you and hold you and sometimes scold you, but make you their own. I guess E.E. did not.
Paul says colleagues, which is an interesting, maybe you don't want to appeal to everybody, but you have someone that you want to touch and to have them respond. You have your audience in your mind, so to speak.
Well, that's true. There are some audiences for some poets, and there are some people who would never be an audience for some poets. And that makes poetry a very dicey business, to tell you the truth. I have a lot of poetry magazines coming into the house, and I rarely like anything in them, and that goes for everything in the New Yorker magazine. I think there's a mad person who's the editor of the poetry columns in the New Yorker magazine, and he's just trying to get our goat.
I think sometimes an artist or a poet develops their own work or puts their work out to just provoke thought. And just, get people to think in their own terms. Like, you don't have to put something out there that says, this is my way of thinking, you should like my way of thinking or think my way of thinking. What do you think about what's there is more often the case, I think.
Yeah, that could be true. I certainly have loved wrestling with Yeats and with Cummings and with other poets that I find difficult. When I was a young girl, 17, taking my first poetry course in college, I thought T.S. Eliot was the mountain. And if I couldn't scale T.S. Eliot, I was worth nothing. But then, as I grew older, I changed my point of view and felt that scaling T.S. Eliot was about the most boring and uninteresting task I could set myself. So we change. The poets probably change too, because they're coming at us at a point in time. And I'm coming at you at a point in time. And you should not believe a thing I say, because tomorrow I might say something quite different. But I think Cummings had that attitude in spades. And when you do, it does probably, as you suggest, mean that he's totally free. He is not attached even to the capital letter I or to any other capital letter. And, he doesn't care about capital letters. And in proofreading this novel I'm trying to get out, boy, do I care about, a mistake in capitalization or punctuation. E.E. didn't. But then I don't think he wrote novels either. Does anyone have a question or a comment? I don't want to bore the pants off you. I probably have already.
It's all really very, very good. Beautiful. You're a great poet.
Oh, thank you. I hope to be a good poet someday. Yes?
How do you reconcile your realist with the sentimentalist?
She uses the word romantic.
I haven't finished working on that yet. I work on it all the time. I am the child of Depression parents who were factory workers. Reality was buzzed into my head at a very early age. I grew up in World War II. I was born in 1938. I was quite aware that people of my connection, although my parents were not religious one iota, but I did know that people in Europe, Germany, France, Poland, were after people just like me. I was acquainted with being other, and I took a very realistic posture, and that is to cover my tracks as much as I could. But then I lived across from a field with buttercups and Queen Anne's lace and wild strawberries growing all over the place, and so I had this chance to balance all the time danger against joy and cruelty against bounty, especially natural bounty, because my parents, aside from love and food and shelter, had very little to give me. But that is a wonderful question that I haven't finished working on. How many of you have the same problem? Surely I'm not alone in the world. Any other comments or questions?
Well, I think that's where hope comes in, right? We have all the suffering and all the awful things that go on in the world, but then you have the romantic part of you, or the, hopeful part of you that says, well, there are still the beautiful fields, where you can go, or even in your imagination, you can kind of, anyway, it's like, you
You're
can
right,
kind of run
Sylvia.
away from all the
Art,
part of it.
music, poetry, avoiding some of the worst stories that come out of the Middle East or Ferguson, Missouri. All these things, although I'm aware of them and I do watch the nightly news, I try not to dwell on them. I try not to read extended verbatim stories about the cruelty that is so prevalent, I think, now in our society. Because if I did that, I think I would lose the balance. And I don't want to lose the balance. It would just make me bitter. Don't want to be bitter. Paul.
I would like to thank you for allowing me to abandon reality for a little over an hour.
Anytime.
I've been sitting here very peaceful
I noticed that.
during this meeting.
Once or twice I thought you might be drifting off.
I thought that too.
That's okay. Paul is a very important person in our writing class, and he usually sits next to me, make sure that I don't forget to sign the roll sheet or put some money in the envelope that we contribute to our underpaid teachers' maintenance.
I feel it's my duty to keep you awake in class.
Sometimes, yes.
Really put a little appreciation. Really appreciate it.
Well, I'm overwhelmed. I love blue, and I love blue iris. These will look so lovely in my dining room. So I think that you've had enough of me. I haven't had enough of you. I hope if I come back, with Sherry's permission, in a year or so, you may come back and tell other people that you got a kick out of it if you did, and bring other people. I just parenthetically got another one of those calls from a vanity press, and they're going to call me at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning to ask what I would like to publish next. And I've never published with them before. And the first thing I said was a book of poetry, because there are many poems I didn't share with you, and there are about 70 pages of poetry here, which is, isn't it a typical poem collection? I mean, they can throw out the ones they don't understand and publish the rest, and I'd still have a book of poetry. So that's what I'll be doing tomorrow, talking to this fast-talking salesman about publishing at 50% off. I couldn't resist that, my poetry. So thank you so much for your attention and your kindness, and I hope someday we might meet again.
Thank you.